So, if you haven't lived under a rock the last few weeks, you've probably heard about the conclusion to one of gaming's most difficult trilogies. Dark Souls, for all its glorious moments and crippling design flaws, has come and passed, and while FromSoft is moving on to different projects, I think this trilogy of games will go down as one of the finest examples of game design to ever grace the face of this planet. And yet, while I still love and adore the third installment of the series, I can't help but feel there's something missing from the design, something that got lost in translation when considering what made Dark Souls 1 as amazing as it was. No, I'm not talking about balancing issues in PvP or the fact that the poise stat is effectively useless. Those are early game issues that will be probably addressed down the line by patches, updates, and absolutely infuriating PR responses. What I'm trying to pick at here is in reference to the overall design, layout, and presentation of the game's world, something that has always been at the heart of the Soulsborne games. Now, a brief warning, spoilers for Dark Souls 1 and 3 are incoming, so if you've not finished either game, consider this your only chance to dodge out of the way. Oops. Too late. You're dead. Level design is tricky and arguably one of the most difficult things to get right in video gaming. And both Dark Souls and Dark Souls 3 have very solid level design, with intricate interwoven areas that provide ample opportunity for ambushes, secrets, and exploration. However, Dark Souls 1 brought the idea of interwoven areas to a whole new level with the way its levels were interconnected. Instead of being linear, almost every area in the game circled back to a few different central points, the most prominent being the original Firelink Shrine, which, for many players, became the de facto base of operations while they played. One thing that always astounded me about the game is how many options you had starting out. From the get-go, you had 3 different unique directions you could travel in: the Undead Burg, the Catacombs, or New Londo, but the game never tells you which way is the most preferable path through conventional means. Instead, you're given some clues through difficulty and resource management. Trying to head out to the Catacombs from the outside would often just end with you dying, being killed by the respawning skeletons who can tank way more damage than you can dish out at early levels. Trying to dive into New Londo put you up against Ghost, which you need Transient Curses, a consumable item, in order to actually face. And while you might get 1 or 2 when you enter the area, it's not going to last you long enough to get through the entire stretch. All of that leaves you with the third and most likely option of climbing up to the Undead Burg. Now here's the kinch that's important. You still don't have to go to the Burg. It's not a requirement. You can power or gun your way through the Catacombs or New Londo. You have that choice open to you, and while New Londo doesn't lead you to a boss like the Catacombs will, it will lead you to the rest of the map, provided you kill the only NPC that can cure curses, steal the key he has, and drain the flooded city. With that open, you have so many more options at your disposal as a player. I looked at it. If you don't kill the NPC, or you don't have the Master Key, which is the only good starting item worth a damn, so why wouldn't you? You have access to 2 bosses from the get-go: the Taurus Demon, accessible through the Undead Burg, and Pinwheel, accessed through the Catacombs. But if you do kill Ingward, or have the Master Key, your options explode. From the minute you land in Firelink Shrine, you could potentially fight any of these enemies as the first real boss. The Taurus Demon, Pinwheel, the Bell Gargoyles, the Moonlight Butterfly, Sif the Great Grey Wolf, Chaos Witch Quelaag, the Stray Demon, or the Capra Demon. That is 8 different and unique options that you can tackle in relatively any order, provided you're skilled or lucky enough to power through some of the high-tiered enemies along the way to get to them. You might be asking why I brought this up in conjunction with Dark Souls 3, and that's because Dark Souls 3 left me wanting for variation and choice as to how I approach my bosses and levels. It wasn't very hard to count how many bosses you can potentially fight after leaving the starting area of the game. There are 2, Vort of the Boreal Valley and the Dancer of the Boreal Valley. There is no plausible way for you to fight anyone else. And while I'll acknowledge Eorix Gundyr is a fantastic opening boss fight, more so than the Asylum Demon, I can't say I'm not disappointed in the lack of options to me as a player. It gets worse too when you realize that the Dancer is a late game enemy with a lot of health and deals a lot of damage. Of the 8 bosses I listed from Dark Souls 1, you can only really argue that Sif and Quelaag are anywhere near late game enemies, and even then they're both relatively balanced fights. A player with enough skill and determination could take them out after only a few tries at low levels. Meanwhile, I think you'd be hard pressed to find a player that can take down the Dancer at very low levels that isn't some kind of master speedrunner. To top that off, the architecture featured in Dark Souls 3 feels rather plain when it comes to arena designs. Of the 19 bosses, 13 of them were standard fare, generic, bland throne rooms, entrance halls, and just big square or circular buildings that didn't really have much of a purpose in the universe other than to house a big old monster throwdown. And that's not even being fair to Dark Souls 1. Of the 26 bosses in that game, 10 of them had traditional style arenas, and on top of that, there were 3 or 4 that still did something interesting with their environments, with interesting environmental obstacles that made the battles more dynamic than, let me cheese this guy around the support pillar. A good example is the Demon Fire Sage, whose arena is strewn with roots, both breakable and unbreakable, making the whole fight a tangled mess to get a new angle on your opponent while simultaneously fighting the foliage. And while the enemy in particular isn't all that memorable, the added level of depth to the fight made it considerably more enjoyable, and made the boss a little more distinguished than its 2 younger brothers back at the asylum. Sadly, bosses like the Demon Fire Sage seem to be the norm when placed in direct comparison to Dark Souls 3. The more interesting battlefields, the less interesting the boss. High Lord Volnir, the Old Demon King, and the Deacons of the Deep all aren't particularly memorable bosses when you get down to it. The best part about them is their arenas. The first time you see Volnir is a masterful play of lighting and direction, utilizing the player's penchant for gathering stuff to lure them into the dark for Volnir's big reveal. Then it's a corridor fight with the player struggling not to get caught in the poison following Volnir or backed against the wall. Then compare that with Volnir himself. He's probably one of the easiest bosses in the game. His attacks are slow, well telegraphed, and easy to dodge. The only times you'll really be unlucky is if he manages to push you all the way back to the rear wall, which leaves you very little breathing room, and summon some of his minions. Similarly, the Old Demon King and the Deacons of the Deep aren't particularly interesting as opponents. The Demon King is just the Demon Fire Sage with an expanded moveset, and the Deacons of the Deep are pushovers once you learn Hit and Run 101. What makes them stand out is their environments. The Demon King, lore-wise, is fascinating, surrounded by the corpses of his constituents, and those 2 piles of bodies make very good, very grim boundaries for you to back off and heal with. Similarly, the Deacons have a big-ass statue pillar thing in the middle that prevents you from flanking the Pope figure without at least a little bit of hassle. It punches up the difficulty of a mediocre boss, so it's at least on standing terms with the rest of the bosses in the game. But very few of the other bosses in the game utilize that kind of ingenuity. For me, one of the most memorable bosses in the game was the Dragon Slayer armor, because it was both a memorable boss and a memorable setting. You have a very competent, very aggressive boss with minimally telegraphed attacks fighting you on a bridge with a fountain in the center. Off to the sides are these bizarre skeletal dragon enemies that wake up halfway through the fight and begin tearing you a new one. This is topped off when you realize that the guardrails of the bridge are breakable and are used against you by the boss. One of the best strategies he has is to bull rush players off the ledge. It creates a dance between yourself and the armor as you try to avoid the edges of the arena and get in hits on the armor, all while avoiding attacks from all sides. But then compare him with the boss before him, the Dancer of the Boreal Valley. It's a fantastic boss, one of the best in the game, and yet the arena is just kind of there to be an arena. Same goes for Eric's Gundyr, Vort of the Boreal Valley, the Crystal Sage, the Abyss Watchers, Pontiff Sullivan, Yorm the Giant, Aldrich, Osseros, Champion Gundyr, Prince Lothric, and the Soul of Cinder. Each of these have minor tweaks on the arena formula, but none drastic enough that it would actually make these battles more interesting and memorable. Prince Lothric could have been far more interesting if the developers had simply had one of those big-ass columns in his throne room be toppled over in order to divide the battlefield in half. This would have made his teleportation mechanic a whole lot more interesting, with the player trying to evade him by running around the column and then having him cut them off. It also would have given the slower characters a nice place to hide and scramble for when Lothric powered up his Energy Blade move. Or hell, it could have detrimented them by forcing them to roll in a direction that's not preferable. Ultimately, I don't think those are the biggest problems that the game has, though I think they should be certainly addressed from a mechanics standpoint. My biggest gripe comes with the tone of the game and how far it's departed from Dark Souls 1. I feel the word epic is overused these days. I'm sure plenty of people feel that way. We're always asking for more epic encounters, we're always asking for more epic battles, but what I don't think people realize is that epic, in modern-day storytelling terminology, is a moniker that has to be earned. Consider the final fights in each game and the radical difference in tone set by each environment. The fight with Gwyn is somber. This is a character that has been played up the entire game, someone that even casual players probably knew by name thanks to multiple characters talking about their admiration or disdain for him and his kingdom. Walking into the kiln of the First Flame, you don't know what to expect. I mean, you're expecting a boss, it's the end of the game. But when I first walked through the gate, I was shocked. I was expecting some big, over-the-top affair, something with bells and whistles all over the place. The bosses throughout the game have been continually getting more and more complex. I had no idea what the final boss would be like. But you walk through that fog gate, and the world is darkness. There's no violins, there's no choir, there's no frills. You see Gwyn. He is literally the only light left in the world after you've slain his compatriots. The fire is growing dim, and he doesn't recognize you as worthy to keep the flames alive. As the only source of light in the room, he charges at you, a gorgeous standalone piano piece drifting in the background as you have one final, honorable duel with the god that started everything, a god who has gone hollow and been driven mad. It's the perfect capstone to the game, reflecting the themes of decay and loss. This once mighty man is nothing, so much so that you, a lowly undead who has worked his way through hell and back, is able to usurp him. The battle feels epic because it plays into the theme of the story, and you are besting the god that everyone praised. You have proven yourself worthy of kindling the flame. That is epic! Then compare with the Soul of Cinder. The music starts up the minute you enter the battlefield. It's just some generic god choir backed with a full orchestra. It's daylight outside. In the distance is this weird sun pillar thing, and the boss uses a variety of over-designed attacks against you. And while I'm normally one for more complexity in battles, there's something appealing about the way Dark Souls 1 went back to basics with Gwyn, almost as if the game itself is telling you, this is all there is left. It doesn't help that we knew nothing of the Soul of Cinder going into the fight. What is this thing? Why is it fighting me? Did I run over its dog or something? We know now that it's the previous Kindlers of the Flame, but there's no personality to it, and again, there doesn't seem to be any reason for it trying to kill us. If anything, if it's representing the fire itself, wouldn't it want me to kindle it? The only reason I could see it wanting to fight me is if I dedicated myself to one of the dark endings. It is a tonal reversal to the Gwyn fight, which felt like the end of an era, the conclusion of one story and the beginning of a new, that you would usher in as either the new kindling or the Lord of Humanity. Meanwhile, the Soul of Cinder feels just like another dime a dozen boss, an obstacle to be overcome, nothing more, nothing less. It's the difference between a grandiose and epic. Grandiosity tries to make the event spectacular through big budget and artificially inflated stakes. Being epic requires defying a previously set expectation, growth and development as a character within the narrative, and ultimately concluding emotional stakes set earlier in the tale. All this seems to reflect a bigger problem in Dark Souls 3, where bosses and arenas seem to be built on the premise of this will be cool, let's put this here, without thinking of the why first. Dark Souls 1 was a cohesive world that engrossed you and made you feel like you were part of it, a growing titan among gods. By comparison, Dark Souls 3 is a bunch of cool-ass boss fights strung together in order with very little justification in between. Therein feels completely detached from Irithyll, from Lothric Castle, from the Kiln of the First Flame, from the profaned capital. In Dark Souls 1, I couldn't imagine the game any differently. You couldn't structure the world any better. Dark Souls 3 feels like 4 different worlds in one, which is fine. They justify it with the lore, but it doesn't feel cohesive to the themes of entropy and decay featured throughout the story. My English professor used to tell me that a novel is like exploring a house in its entirety, that a novella is like exploring a single floor, that a short story is exploring a room, and a flash story is peeking through a keyhole. Dark Souls 1 is structured in such a way that it feels like we can explore an entire house, with nooks and crannies and stories to tell. Dark Souls 3 feels like we're visiting a sequence of rooms in no particular order, which leads to a disjointed and ultimately unfulfilling stay. But for all I've said here, Dark Souls 3 is still a fantastic game. The gameplay itself is smooth, the bosses are generally inventive, and the difficulty is very well balanced. It's probably the most fun Souls game to date. It's just not the most emotionally rewarding one, which is where Dark Souls 1 still shines. However, all of that is just my opinion. Feel free to agree or disagree in the comments below, so long as you do so in a calm and genial manner. I'm Remy McNeil, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Catch you on the flip side. Hey there! If you liked the video, please hit that like button down below, or even leave a message in the comments. If you're interested in more content like this, check out the rest of the channel, as well as our Facebook page and my Twitter handle. If you'd like updates on our newest content, hit that subscribe button so our news of our most recent work reaches you as fast as possible. And if you're feeling especially generous today, please check out our Patreon page. Keep in mind, full-length videos get released there at least 2 days prior to being made public. It's thanks to you, our faithful fans and followers, that we can make the content that we love. Please keep up that support, and as always, we'll catch you on the flip side.